But while the kids are headed out, I got a question for you. Anybody doing any spring work projects around the house? Anybody be doing that? Anybody taking care of the house, or maybe have you been working on a project over the winter months, or maybe even the project started way back in the fall? Anybody do anything like that? Anybody work on your house? Yeah, I see some heads nodding. I see hands up. Yeah, it just seems like it's a never-ending project, right? If you own a home, you're constantly having to take care of the home. Everything in it seems to just kind of continue to decline and need to be updated and fixed and repaired, or aesthetically need some work on it. And the same is true for me. We've been in our home for 27 years, which we've been incredibly grateful for. But in 27 years, there's a lot of things that have needed repairs. And so over the past couple of months, I found myself painting a bedroom that hadn't been painted in 27 years. I painted the hallway. I think it was probably my third time painting the hallway, with 6 kids and lots of suitcases that bang the halls, and lots of boys that are banging into things. And there's lots of nicks and dings and scratches. And so I painted the hallway. Recently, I cut down 2 over 10 feet. I mean, they have to be over 10 feet because they're way over the top of the roof of the house. These pine shrubs that started out when we planted them, they were only a foot high. So after 27 years, these things have turned into these massive, monster, round, huge, tall things. They needed to go, so we cut those things down. Last year, about this time, when the 2 boys came home from college, our 2 youngest are college students, and they had a little lag there before they started work, I hired them because we had a project to do in which we ripped out ceramic tile floor out of the kitchen. We have 60 man hours in that project of jackhammering out all of this tile, and then replacing that with 3/4 inch solid hickory wood. And that was a big, huge job. And just before that one, we had to redo their bathroom. Fiberglass tub was starting to crack in the bottom, and that sits above the kitchen ceiling, and I was concerned that we might have a leak, and I didn't want to have a leak coming into the kitchen, so we had to saw that thing out and bust up the floor, and we replaced everything in that project. All this to just say that when you have a house, you own a house, there's a lot of things that you got to do to maintain it. Now, in our case, some of them were they were required kinds of things, like crack and a tub. And if you don't maintain this, if you don't invest the money in that, you're going to have greater damage in the future. And so that project had to get done. But others of them were just aesthetics things. It's been 27 years, and a little bush that was a foot high turned into a monstrosity that needed to be removed because it became an eyesore that also overtook the sidewalk, and you can barely get up the sidewalk. And so sometimes you have projects that are one or the other. Now you're probably wondering, why am I talking about house projects? Why are you talking about house projects on Sunday morning in a Sunday worship service? Well, the reason I'm talking about house projects is because we actually have a house project here at 1806 Harrisburg Avenue. We have a house project, God's house, that we need to do a little bit of work on. So today we're pausing our series, Genesis. It all starts here. And we're going to be talking about this topic of taking care of God's house. This is something that we have been talking about for quite some time, multiple months, dating way back to our fall congregational meeting, then a special meeting in February, and then our congregational meeting last week. And so today actually is the day when we invite the whole congregation to be fully aware of what is in front of us as a church in terms of our responsibility for taking care of God's house. Taking care of God's house. So the message today comes from a very little read book from one of the minor prophets, and just only 2 chapters long. The prophet is Haggai, and he wrote and ministered 520 BC. Now, we know that he wrote and ministered in 520 BC because the way that he begins talking to the nation of Israel by giving all these clear dates, which is connected to this King Cyrus, who's the king of Persia, and in the particular month and in the particular year of his reign. And so we know that his ministry and the book of Haggai begins on August the 29th, 520 BC, because he gives us that dating. So he writes to the nation of Israel in a time in which they are in captivity or have recently returned from captivity. And so we're going to go back here to our Genesis series, and I'm going to give a little bit of history and context to help us to understand what it is that Haggai is confronting in the nation of Israel. So remember, our series, Genesis, it all starts here. It all starts here. It's important to understand the book of Genesis in order to understand all that follows after. So we've, so far in our series, have encountered the character Abraham, right? And have learned that God has promised to bless him, to bless his family, to turn him into a great nation, to give them this promised land, and then to bless the world through him. And that God gave that same promise to Abraham's son Isaac, and then again to his son Jacob. And so that's as far as we've gotten so far in the story. Well, we're going to eventually get to the end of the book of Genesis, but when you get to the end of Genesis, God had turned them into a nation of about 70 people. You flip the page from Genesis to Exodus, and 400 years go by, and now they're a nation of 2 million people. And about 1440 BC, God then takes this 2 million people, the fulfillment of his promise, Abraham, I'm going to turn you into a great nation. Now they're this great nation, 400 years later, living in captivity in Egypt. I'm going to take them out of Egypt and bring them into the promised land, the other fulfillment to the promise that God had made to Abraham. So if you read Exodus, what you find is this nation in the wilderness and very disobedient. And as a result, God requires them to wander around for 40 years. But there's something unique and special that happens. God says to the nation, I'm going to dwell with you, I'm going to be with you, and I want you to establish a tent. And this tent is going to be the place that I'm going to meet with you. And it will be called the tabernacle, and it will be something that you can pack up and you can take around and carry with you through the wilderness and then ultimately into the promised land. So all this is 1400 BC. Well, fast forward 400 years. They eventually make it into the promised land. They are led through the judges over a 400-year period. And then it's the first king. The first king is Saul. And then it's the second king, David. And David has this vision to build a building, a permanent building to meet with God, the temple. But God says to David, no, it's not for you to do. It's your son Solomon who will have this responsibility. And so Solomon then builds this elaborate structure, this temple. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But not too long later, again, another couple hundred years, the nation of Israel, disobedient. God sends the nation of Syria and then eventually Babylon to bring punishment upon the nation. And in 586 BC, Babylon marches into Jerusalem and destroys the temple that Solomon had built and carries all the people off into captivity. And so they're in captivity, and then after about 70 years, they are released to return back to the promised land. Okay, so again, it all starts in Genesis with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Just one guy, great nation. Now, 1,000 years worth of living for these people. All these structures, these places that God meets with his people. Destruction, captivity, now a return. They get to go back home. Now, what's interesting is that we have archaeological evidence to some of these things, and there's multiple pieces, but we're just going to talk about one right now, and it is from King Cyrus, who's the Persian king. So after the Babylonians came in, and they were the dominant world power at the time, taking Israel into captivity, it's the Persians that rise up. They take over the Babylonians and establish a unique culture in which King Cyrus sends back people who've been taken into captivity. And there's this really cool thing called Cyrus's cylinder that has been uncovered and discovered, in which it recounts these activities of him as the king of Persia, his conquering of Babylon, and then his sending back of nations that had been conquered back to their homelands to establish and rebuild their places of their temples, their places of worship to whatever their gods are. It has been said that Cyrus is like the first humanitarian of civilization. He's the first guy who was empathetic towards different cultures and different people's religious beliefs and opinions, and thought that people should be free to worship whomever, however they wanted in the place from which they came. And so Cyrus sends people back. Now, what we find in the Bible then is an interesting description of Cyrus's sending back of his people. So the book of Ezra talks about this. And Haggai and Ezra are working at basically the same time period, or ministering at the same time period. So this next slide, Ezra chapter 5, these are the words from God through the prophet Ezra to the nation of Israel. He says, however, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild the house of God. He even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to the temple in Babylon. Then King Cyrus gave them to a man named Sheshbazzar, and I don't know if I said that right, whom he had appointed governor. And he told him, take these articles and go and deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem and rebuild, this is interesting, the house of God, rebuild the house of God on its site. Now this is King Cyrus saying, send the nation back and rebuild the house of God. So this Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. From that day to the present, it has been under construction, but it is not yet finished. Okay, so this is Ezra. Now Haggai picks up in this time frame because it's 18 years that the nation has been living and not rebuilding the temple. King Cyrus said, go back and rebuild your temples. The nation of Israel went back and for 18 years left the temple unbuilt. So this is where Haggai then comes in 18 years later. And if you have a Bible, I invite you to meet me in Haggai chapter 1. There's only 2 chapters, so it's really an easy book to kind of miss. It's at the very end of your Old Testament. If you need a Bible, we have some out in the lobby. They're always available. Feel free to take it, or you can just follow on the side screens. And here are the words of Haggai the prophet. He says, in the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. And this is what the Lord Almighty says. The people of Israel say that the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. Well, the people are saying this, right? It's not time for us to rebuild the house of God. We don't need to do this. We've got other things to do that are more important. This is what God is saying. This is what the people are. He's revealing the heart of the people. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it time, this is God now asking to the nation, is it time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses? Paneled houses. That phrase references houses that are complete. So rather than having stone walls, which that's the common building structure, right? You're going to use a stone wall. They covered them over. So like this building is built with cinder block, and as you look, you see no cinder block anywhere, right? We've covered it over. We've paneled over in this auditorium space all that cinder block. And so this is God saying to the nation, is it time for you yourselves to be living in your nicely finished homes while this house of mine remains a ruin? Now, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give very careful thought to your ways. You've planted much, but have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in purses with holes in it. So this is what the Lord Almighty says. Second time, give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build the house of the Lord, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why? Declares the Lord Almighty. Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, because of your actions, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. I called for a drought in the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and whatever the ground produces, on men and cattle, and on the labor of your hands. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message to the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. And so the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah. And the Lord also stirred up the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. And the Lord also stirred up the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. And they came and they began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty their God on the 24th day of the 6th month in the 2nd year of King Darius. All right, I just want to make 3 observations from this text. Obviously, this is written to a particular group of people at a particular time in history. So this is to the nation of Israel, and we learn something. We learn there's 3 things that we learn from this passage. The first one is this. It's that God, the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. And again, back into our Genesis series, as we encountered that, the capital L-O-R-D, we've learned that this is God's personal name. I am Lord, and also referencing a sovereign over all, pre-existing, existing presently, and existing into the future. I am the sovereign God. So I am Lord, and what we learn here is that the Lord, the sovereign God, has a house. He has a house. So 5 times in this text, God refers to his house, and uses the language, this house, or build the house, or my house, or the house of the Lord. The Lord has a house. That's an interesting observation. But the second thing to consider as we think about that truth that the Lord has a house is to remember that throughout Scripture, we know that while God has a house, God is too big to live in a house, right? So the Lord has a house, but he doesn't live in the house. Why doesn't he live in the house? Well, because he's sovereign over all of it. So we see, for example, in 1 Kings 8, we see Solomon and the dedication of the temple saying, but will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, they can't contain you. How much less this temple that I've built, this magnificent temple, which, by the way, you can go and see the exterior wall in Israel, and you can walk around the Temple Mount and see how massive the structure was. How can God, God, you're too big, Solomon says, to live in this. The psalmist says the same thing. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne, with this picture, this idea that the Lord lives someplace above and beyond anything and everything that we can potentially see. Or Isaiah, God through Isaiah the prophet. This is what the Lord says: heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. Where is this house that you build for me? Where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all these things? And so they came into being, declares the Lord. In other words, you can't contain me. I'm not going to live in a house. And yet he calls it his house, right? So that's interesting. And then if you continue to think about where we've been in the Genesis story and the little bit of history that I presented, while God does not live in a house, this next slide helps us to see that God has chosen to meet his people in a very nice house. God has chosen to meet his people in a very nice house. And so, for example, if you spend some time in Exodus 35 through chapter 40, you find this elaborate description of this tabernacle, this tent that would be all packed up, and the Levites were the ones responsible for this as they wandered through the desert and then ultimately into the promised land, and it stayed established, the tabernacle, for hundreds and hundreds of years. But this tabernacle, from Exodus 35, you find all of this. I gave us just a snippet of some of the detail of the quality and the kinds of things that God required or asked of the people to contribute to the building of this tent of meeting. And we find the same thing if we go to the next slide so this is God coming after they sent up the tabernacle. But then to the next slide, when they build the temple. So when Solomon builds the temple, it's this amazing, elaborate structure. So you can read about all the details of this, but when you read about, in particular, the tabernacle, you see all this language to paneling and all this wood everywhere, again, referencing to this complete, this finished, this beautiful, beautiful structure. The Ezra text reminded us of all of the gold and the precious jewels and all the wealth that went into the structure. So the Lord has a house. He doesn't dwell in the house, but he does meet with his people in a very, very, very nice house. That's the first observation. The second observation from this text is that with the nation of Israel, who has returned to the promised land, God is not happy with them, right? It's 18 years, Ezra tells us, that they've been living in their houses, their fine paneled houses, and yet not doing anything in regards to reconstructing or building back up this temple that has been destroyed. And God disciplines the nation. And he raises, he helps us to uncover and discover the discipline by raising questions. So why do you think it is that you go and you plant and you don't have a good return for the all the time that you've invested in planting your seed and trying to grow the harvest? And why don't you get good wine? And why is it that you did go to work and you put the money in the bank, but the money just seems to disappear? Why is that happened? Well, nation of Israel, it's happening because you have not been doing what I instructed you to do, and that is to take care of my house. You left my house in ruins while you're living in really nice houses. It's not appropriate. And then the third observation from this text is that the people hear this. They obey. They have a sense of awe, that language of fear, sense of fear and awe of who God is. And then the text tells us that God stirs up their hearts. And they get to work. They go up in the mountains, they cut down the trees, they bring them in, and they go to work at reconstructing the tabernacle. The temple. So what do we do with this? This is, the nation of Israel. This is God's instruction to the nation of Israel. And how does this apply to us today? Well, certainly we can't say that God is speaking to us directly about rebuilding a temple, right? But there are principles of application to us. So while God does not dwell in a building, he definitely meets with us in a building. And so we on Sunday mornings have made it our habit, living in 2025, Elizabethtown, Mount Joy, and surrounding area, have made it a habit to gather together as the people of God in worship to God at 1806 Harrisburg Avenue, Mount Joy, Pennsylvania. This is just what we do to help us in the process of being internally strong and being externally focused. So we meet in this building. And this building has been owned by the church since 1997. So yeah, we purchased this building in 1997. The history of our church is in 1994. The Hershey Free Church sent out Don and Robin Bush, and I know Don was here earlier and Robin somewhere, and Don's probably in the nursery right now, along with a couple other couples, and several of you have been around since way back in the beginning days. And you remember how God stirred in your hearts to plant a church here in this community. And then how God grew that church, and then a couple of years later purchased this building, this piece of property, which at the time was, let's go to the next slide. At the time looked like this. So this is taken from right across the street here where the telephone poles are, right? Looking across Harrisburg Avenue, 1997. This is what the building looked like. And at the time, this was used as a warehouse for a moving company. And prior to that, it had been a place in which cabinetry was made. And Brian, who I see sitting right here, used to work here when it was used to build cabinetry and millwork and those kinds of things. He tells me he used to work on a machine that was right over there. And so in 97, the church purchased this property. And since 97, we've done a little bit of work to renovate the property. So this next slide just kind of shows you what it looks like today, right? So we've believed that we should invest in this property to update it and to maintain it. Some of this was necessary to structurally shore up some things. But the space that we're sitting in right now used to look like this. So this is all of these exposed beams here used to have a dropped ceiling. Now, I wasn't here then, but Keith, you probably remember. Keith, you would have been up there and ripped down these the drop ceiling that was there, and then just exposed all of this wood. And you can see the windows that are here. And so after a year or so of working tirelessly, eventually the inside got to this place, and it looked like this. And this was what the space looked like until just a couple of years ago when we renovated the auditorium space, which we're seated in right now and looks pretty familiar to us. But there's other parts of this building as well, and some of you have never been to the basement and have no idea what it looks like down there, or certainly all of you have been through the lobby. So let's just talk about the lobby really quickly. So the next slide here, this is what the lobby looks like. So we're standing here at the welcome desk and kind of looking out. And as you look out, that's where the glass doors are. And we've kind of come up to it. So there's no lobby, right? There's no roof there. And so the next slide is taken from the glass doors, looking at the back of the wall here. And so that's what it looks like if we ripped off all the drywall. This would be, unfinished. This would be unfinished, not paneled. And so the next slide, the way that it looks pretty close to the way that it looks today. I mean, there's some things that we've already done that are different to that, but we've renovated and updated that space, and then the basement. So the youth room, for those of you who've never been downstairs, this is what it used to look like. And wow, I've seen a whole lot of other pictures of what this looked like. It was pretty rough looking down, kind of scary some places. And then just 2 years ago, we updated the youth space, and it had been updated before that. And so this is what the youth space looks like today. Now, all of this to just simply say that as a church, using this place for a place to meet with God, whether it be on Sunday morning in worship, or whether it be on Tuesday for youth, or Wednesday for Awana, or Thursday mornings with moms in prayer, and on, and the different things that happen as we gather in this building, we've seen fit over the years to update the space. Now, I don't know about you and your home, if there's any places that when you have guests, you don't take them to. You know, you keep the door closed. You don't let them kind of go in there because, it doesn't look quite as nice as the rest of your home. Well, we have some of that here in our own facility. Some of the sense in which, we need to update some stuff because it's a bit outdated. It's 27 years old. Some of these things. And then there are some things that just need to be replaced and repaired, or we're going to deal with further damage. And so the elders have made a recommendation to the congregation back in November, and then in the middle of February, we voted on that recommendation, and the congregation approved a facility renovation project of $250,000 to renovate these next phase for 4 areas. And so we're talking about renovating our nursery and toddler rooms as well as the bathrooms. That's phase 1. Phase 2, the lobby, along with a bunch of things that we're talking about replacing and updating there. And then phase 3 moves into the classrooms up here on the first floor. Phase 4 gets into the kitchen and then updating things on the outside that need to be taken care of. Now, you may be wondering, well, how much is this going to cost and what all is involved with this project? So the next slide gives us a little bit of those details. The cost of the project is $250,000. We've been saving for this, so we have $90,000 on hand. Since we've kind of been talking about this, and those who are members and been coming to congregation meetings have given $20,000 so far. So we're looking to raise roughly $40,000 to complete all 4 phases of the project. And to kind of give you a few pictures of what it will look like. So this next slide has a few of those tiles and things that will be going into the bathrooms. If you're interested, you want to see them and touch them, they're in the lobby today. So we invite you to stop out there. It's the men's and women's rooms. And then the next slide. So these are just some inspiration ideas for the lobby itself. We're going to be putting in some brick wall as well as some more of this pallet wall, and then new doors and updating that whole entrance. So these are the phases of the project, images for what the project will look like, and the cost of the project. And now you might be saying, well, okay, so now what about how might I be involved in this? And so this next slide, or when is this going to get started? So this next slide here helps us to see that the cost of phase 1 is $65,000, which means we already have that in hand. And it's the first part of phase 1 that we're going to do is we're going to update the bathrooms. And so next Monday, the bathrooms are going to get demoed. Next Monday and Tuesday. You're going to just completely gut them. And so for the next couple of weeks on Sunday mornings when we come to gather and worship in the Lord's house, and we need to use the restrooms, there won't be available upstairs. You'll have to go downstairs. For those of you who've never been downstairs, you're going to now find out downstairs and what that is, and you can tour that space. But we're going to start demoing on Monday, May the 12th, and into Tuesday, with the goal of completing that first part by the 1st of, or June 6th. Next slide. So what can I do? There's 2 things. So we see in the text that God stirred the nation, right? They only went up because they heard what the prophet had to say, and they listened to what the prophet said. They felt a internal sense of conviction, and they chose to obey and to fear God. And so then they went up because the Spirit of God had stirred their hearts. And that phrase, stirred their hearts, is interesting because if you go back and you look at the Exodus story in which God says to the nation, hey, bring in your gifts for the building of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, the text tells us that Everyone is to give according to how it is that God lays it on their heart. So there's this stirring in the heart of each one. So if God is stirring in your heart, as God has been stirring in the heart of the elders and stirring in the heart of the members of our congregation to move forward in this, there's two things that you can do. One, you can give your time and your skills. So there's if you stop out in the lobby at one of the tables, you can pick up this brochure here that kind of gives a lot of the details. And on the back, there's a QR code that you can just zoom in on your camera, and it'll take you to the Sign Up Genius. We're attempting to do all the work ourselves. There's so many of us in the construction industry, and many of us who just have skills and can invest them. So if that's you, you can sign up to help out in that way. But secondly, it's going to cost. There's a financial cost to this, and it's a significant cost. And so we invite you to consider making a significant gift, a significant financial gift to the project. How, you might ask, might I figure that out or determine that, or how do I decide how much I should give? And this obviously is a personal decision between you and God. So what we as elders are encouraging you to do is to take some time and to pray about this. Seek God on this. Ask God to direct you and to stir your heart on this. And then consider these 4 R's. The first one being, is it reasonable? Based on my income, as I look at my income, and maybe there's a certain number that God places on your heart, is that a reasonable amount of money that I can give? Secondly, how does that amount that I'm thinking about relate to the way in which I live my life? If, for example, I'm investing this money in my house to tear up my floor and to purchase new flooring, and we're going to do the same thing here, or in my case, I'm ripping out a bathroom and replacing it with a new tub, a new sink, new toilets, new tile. If I invested that in my house, then if I had the funds to do that, it's relative to what I can afford. Can I make that same contribution back to God's house? Reprioritize. Maybe there are, as I look at my finances, I can reorganize or prioritize the ways in which I'm spending my money in order to make a significant gift. And then lastly, perhaps God may be nudging you to give a certain number, and you're like, I don't know how I can do that. Like, I don't know where the money will come, but I'm going to step out by faith and trust that God is going to meet me, give me the finances in order to do that. And I'm going to ask our worship team to come up, and as they come, how we landed today, how I landed today with this text. I just want to just share a brief story with you. So as we were having these conversations as an elder team, which we've been talking about for probably 2 years now, right? With the big focus that we have on trying to increase our abilities to be an excellent church that welcomes people. One of the things that, there's been a number of things that we've identified, and a number of you have been involved in helping us in that. But one of the things that we identified is our facility and updating our facility. And why, and working through the rationale for why. And this text from Haggai was mentioned. And I sat down one afternoon and I read through this passage back in the fall. And as I read that phrase, the people say that they don't need to build the house of God, and that the people are living in their fine paneled houses. I just started thinking about myself and how God has taken care of all of our needs and given us an amazing place to live that we've been in for 27 years, and how we've been able to invest in that piece of property and to update it and to make it make it aesthetically pleasing as well as functionally, to continue to be structurally solid, doing, what you got to do in replacing roofs and all this, which all have required my time, required sometimes hiring people, and definitely required setting aside and planning to have money set aside. And as I read that text and I thought about where I'm at in my own personal life, I just thought, how can I not give significantly to this? And so I sat down with my wife and I said, Valerie, I don't know what is God saying to you about this? And let me tell you about what it is that God is saying to me. And I laid out a number. She was like, wow. And just tell me more about that. And as I worked through the process and she started asking questions and we went back and forth in this, the number that we arrived at, quite significant, rooted in this passage. And so I hope that God is, I can't stir in your heart. Here's what I'll say. This project will get accomplished as God stirs in us to make it about. And whatever it is that gets accomplished of it. So I just invite you into that process of seeking God and praying and asking him about how you might be involved. Again, you can stop out in the lobby and get more info. There's a little thermometer out there, more details. We're going to be tracking that. You can stop out weekly as we see this. But I'm going to invite you to stand now. And as we sing this final song, to recognize that everything that you have, everything that I have, everything that we have as a church isn't ours, it's God's.
Make this your prayer. All to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust in his presence daily. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender all. The obvious key I found, worldly pleasures all forsaken, in Jesus take me now. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender. Make me Savior, holy thine. Fill me with thy love and power, we know that thou art mine. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender.
is no better place to be than in this place of surrender, of just surrendering your whole life to Jesus. If you've never surrendered your life to Christ, I invite you to do that. If you live holding on to things, I invite you to release, have open hands. Just be grateful for all that you have and surrender it all to Jesus. Have a good week. You're dismissed.